I would have been okay with 20 more minutes of music. I'll take the day off of preaching. I'm all right with that. Scott, we'll get to that potluck, won't we, buddy? That's what we'll do. Hold on a second here, Ben. Let me get myself organized. Oh. Is that the first one? All right, we're going. Today we are talking about the conversion or the transformation of Paul. I would say his pre-Jesus encounter name being Saul. But we're going to talk about this today. And what I want to do is read a little more in our passage from where Marilyn read. I didn't want her to have to read too much today, but it ended at verse 6, and I want to start from there and start in verse 7. It says, and I'll end with verse 6, but it says, "But get up, enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." The men who were traveling with him, being Saul, stood speechless because they heard the voice but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. For 3 days he was without sight and neither ate nor drank. Now there was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias. The Lord said to him in a vision, "Ananias," he answered, "Here I am, Lord." The Lord said to him, "Get up and go to the street called Straight, and at the house of Judas look for a man of Tarsus named Saul. At this moment he is praying, and he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him so that he might regain his sight." But Ananias answered, "Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much evil he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priests to bind all who invoke your name." But the Lord said to him, "Go, for he is an instrument whom I have chosen to bring my name before Gentiles and kings and before people of Israel. I myself will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name." So Ananias went and entered the house. He laid his hands on Saul, and he said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on your way here, has sent me so that you may regain your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit." And immediately something like scales fell from his eyes, and his sight was restored. Then he got up and was baptized. And after taking some food, he regained his strength. So I want you to just do a little imagination for a second. In your head, from what you know about Paul or what you've ever heard about Paul or what you think about Paul, what do you think Paul looks like? What kind of man would you think Paul is? If you encountered him on the street, picture him for me. Hopefully you got it. Now, I asked AI to create Paul for me. This is what they came up with. He must be a man of the animals. The deers and the rabbits are hanging out. He's writing letters, so that's good. We got that. But this is AI's version of Paul from the Bible. Paul, though, was far from some kind of physically intimidating person. His physical presence wasn't enough to scare people or Christians who were following Jesus. It was more about what he had authority to do. We know a little bit about Paul's physical presence. 2 Corinthians 10:10 says, "For someone says, his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech is contemptible." Paul always had pretty strong words, and it would cause people at times to not respect him or like him or really struggle with what he has to say. But the thought is his bodily presence doesn't come across as a particularly strong person. Cambridge University published a peer review on the physical appearance of Paul. And they found through a 2nd century church father, about 100 years after Paul, stated that he was a man of small stature. We believe he was probably somewhere between 4.5 feet to 5 foot tall, with a bald head and crooked legs, bow-legged. In a good state of body, meaning he was somewhat physically stocky, with eyebrows meeting, so he had a unibrow, and a nose somewhat hooked. This is not the guy that you would probably come across and be like, oh, I'm so afraid of you, right? That's not where he gets his scariness for Christians in that time, or even just Jesus followers, as they were probably just more known of. So I asked AI to create a description of Paul based on that. This is what I got. He's cute. Doesn't have the unibrow, but that could be like a little cartoon character, right? That's AI giving me Paul. I'll go a little off topic here for a second. A lot of pastors, there's a lot of debate in ministry whether pastors should use AI to help them craft sermons. Some pastors are doing it. These two images are reasons why we should not ever use AI. AI doesn't, translate this well. Like, it takes us to do this, people, to use our own imaginations, to think about this, to know what we know. So Saul, this pre-Jesus version of Paul, he created a very feared image among Christians, so much so that Aeneas had heard about him. And where Aeneas is, in the location of Jerusalem, I want to say is something like 60 miles plus away. So Christianity has spread, and enough that they have heard about Paul far away and what he is doing. His name evokes some fear. So a little background on Paul. He was born in Tarsus. It's a city in Cilicia. It's a free city of the Romans. He was a Jew like his parents. He's from the tribe of Benjamin. He went to school in Tarsus. He learned poetry, learned philosophy, and later went on to Jerusalem to study divinity. He went on to be a Pharisee. So Paul was educated, which probably makes sense the way he writes these letters and things like that. He also became a tradesman. Paul became a tent maker, which was common for people in that area that he was in. They had to have some kind of trade, and that was his trade. Paul was also a Roman citizen. So he was a Pharisee, a Roman citizen, educated. Paul was living a pretty decent life for what somebody would probably think of a man that day. He was doing okay. He had status. He had authority. But Paul also had a strong belief that he had to persecute Christians, and that being against Jesus, he was actually serving God. For Paul, his conviction was that when people worshiped Jesus or spoke or were following Jesus, that was blasphemy against God. That was his strong conviction. So he felt very justified in what he was doing. He felt like what he was doing was following his faith. And people, all times, we're always convicted by what we believe is true by our faith. We can have very, very strong convictions. Recently, I went down to the border with my partner. She is very involved with border work. She goes about every week. And she works with an organization called the Samaritans. The Samaritans, their role in working on the border is that when migrants come over, they want to be the first face that the migrants see. They want them to see somebody welcoming them in, smiling. People are hungry, they're starving, they're dehydrated, and so they want to give them food and give them water and start a fire and help to give them clothes if they need it. And then what they do is they contact Border Patrol, which is usually nearby, and they come down and they help to facilitate that, to make sure that the migrants aren't being taken advantage of or there isn't any kind of confrontation. So they just try to just help facilitate that process. That's all they're there to do. They just want to be the first friendly face. It's a lovely, compassionate ministry. Take away any political feeling about that. That's just being compassionate to a fellow human. And I think when we encounter people and we see the human experience, it helps us to be more compassionate. Because these same Samaritans, They spend time and talk with the border agents. They care for them. My partner has even served food and water to those who are part of the cartel. Because she says, you don't know the situation that put him in this situation. She just wants to move with compassion. That's a whole next level, right? For a lot of us, we may not be able to do that. That's just another level of compassion, realizing these are people, we don't always know the circumstances. But they shared a story with me, the Samaritan people shared a story with me about a woman who's been down there. I don't know if she's there anymore because the military's coming in, or if they're in there now. You can't get it's complicated. But there was a woman living in a tent for a couple weeks, armed, has her AR-15, has her handguns. And she's very convicted that she is called by God to be there to save the babies, her words. I'm with you. I think everybody in this room wants to protect kids. We want to care for kids. I don't want kids being trafficked. I don't want kids being hurt, harmed. I don't want none of that. I am with her. I'm with you on that. Yes, 100,000%. But I don't think violence against people is the solution. I don't think threatening to shoot people is the solution. There are vigilantes down there emptying water barrels in the desert so people die in the desert. There are people with AR-15s who have threatened to shoot the Samaritans and have called them the worst names that you could ever find because they simply are just trying to show compassion to others based on their faith. Just trying to show compassion. They're armed down there. They've chased them in their vehicles. And they're all convicted by their faith. You have the Samaritans convicted by their faith. You have the vigilantes convicted by their faith. You have this woman convicted by their faith. Who's right? Who is correct in this? And I can't help but think about this when I think about Paul, because Paul is so convicted in his faith, he thinks by hurting other Christians, he is correct. But all we have to do is look at Jesus. And you see someone who doesn't place judgment or damnation or commit violence to others who simply may not follow him or disagree with him. When Jesus talks to his disciples and says that when you go into these areas and these houses and you're preaching to people, if they don't accept your words, just move along. Just simply move along. Doesn't tell them to commit violence. Doesn't tell them to judge them. Just move along. I think that's an entry point for us. If our conviction makes us to desire to harm another, I think that is in conflict with Jesus because we do not see it reflected in him. I also think Jesus crosses many faith boundaries. Yes, Christianity is modeled after Jesus, but Jesus is also a Jewish man. And when Jesus, after he cleanses the temple, flips over the tables, he says, this is a place of worship for all nations. All nations. He doesn't say just for my followers. He doesn't say just for those that believe this way or these that are from this area. All nations are welcome in this place. That's deeply challenging. One thing I love about disciples is we are deeply ecumenical. We want to work with other faiths and respect them. However, we can see that's not always how other Christians move or even how other faiths move with Christians. But for us, if we're following Jesus, all means all. Jesus says so. Worship, our place, is for all people. So if someone feels convicted to commit violence against someone else and make the claim that God sent them or this is for God, I think it goes against one of God's most basic commandments. Do not kill. And it's also not modeled from Jesus, who chooses peace over violence and welcomes over excludes. So when Paul is doing his work against Christians and is traveling the road to Damascus, he comes across Jesus suddenly, and Jesus says, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Why do you persecute me? And the guys that are with Paul are just kind of left speechless. I would be too, right? If I'm traveling and this happens, I would be too. Dude, Saul, get off the ground. Why are you laying on the ground for? Like they see this light, but they can't see Jesus. They hear this voice. They are just shocked. And Paul kind of goes blind. Now this is to humble Paul. And Paul will need help to make to his destination. He's got to rely on people. And later on in life, Paul will have this thorn in his side that just bugs him every day. That is also to keep Paul humble. And I'm not justifying the use of like uncomfortableness or pain or tough circumstances to humble people, but can we just be honest? Those things just happen. And don't they just humble you? You know, some failures are good for humble. Some pain is good for humble. Failure is good for humble. And we need humility in our faith. I think humility helps us to care and be more compassionate to people. And I believe that Saul losing his sight and regaining it through the divine, but being administered, this is administered by Aeneas, who actually had to set aside his own belief, his own thought about Paul. He was scared of Paul. He heard about him. I can't imagine. He's probably like, I don't want to care for this. We got him. Jesus, we got him. He's in the house. Let's take care of this guy. I don't know if these conversations happen, but I imagine modern day times, our enemy, whoever we deem that to be, walks into our space, who's been killing our friends. We got him. Let's handle him now. Nope. Jesus says, absolutely not. I'm going to use him. Because if he can transform Paul to his followers and his people in Rome, boy, anything is going to be possible in their eyes. This guy, the guy who used to do this, is now this. It shows the transformative power of Jesus' grace and God's grace. So Aeneas had to set aside his own personal feelings to follow Jesus' command. And that's tough to do. We get convicted personally, and sometimes that's what we got to seek out. Is this my feeling? Is this my own personal conviction? Or is this actually what Jesus is calling me to do? And I think this is a major part of the story. Aeneas is the major part of this story. We get focused on Paul and his confrontation with Jesus and his transformation, and Aeneas is kind of a background character. But I think we are more Aeneas than we ever are Paul. Because sometimes we just stop at Paul seeing Jesus, but I think about the love and mercy and forgiveness that Jesus is showing and what he is doing with Paul and through Paul. And I imagine, just think about the forgiveness and grace and mercy that even Aeneas has to give. I mean, this is grace beyond our human abilities and capabilities at times. Can you do the same thing? Could I do the same thing? Gosh, I don't know. I can't help but think back to my partner who goes out into the desert and welcomes cartel members. That is grace beyond what most people will give. But what if in that moment, that grace given away is the grace that transforms that person? What if? What if? Maybe it doesn't, but what if? But Paul needs to be humbled. Because what gets in our way? Pride gets in our way, but humility, I believe, is this wrecking ball to these walls of pride that we have. Sometimes we have to smash it a few times and knock it down. It doesn't just come down with one strike. We got to keep hitting it and keep hitting it. I don't know how thick our walls are. Lord knows I've been pretty prideful. Lord knows we all probably have been. Sometimes some people's walls are thicker than others. But humility helps to take that down and to see people and to meet people where they are. to acknowledge their experience. Because sometimes, we feel we are justified. We are superior in our belief. We are the morally correct ones. We're unable to maybe understand or even desire to understand someone else's experience or faith life. Even inside Christianity, there are those who are so prideful that they believe theirs is the only belief and everyone else is damned. Our lovely neighbor down the street 2 weeks ago made sure everybody knows that anybody who welcomes anybody who is gay in their church is damned. That's pride. That's pride. And we need to be more like Aeneas, who shows this humility and grace. And as I was writing this sermon, I was kind of thinking back to Jonah. Think about Jonah. God tried to send Jonah to the Ninevites to preach to them. Jonah's like, man, they are terrible people. They don't deserve to be saved. They don't deserve your grace and love and mercy. And God's like, no, you're going to go. They absolutely do. Jonah's like, absolutely not. So to show Jonah humility, God sends him into the belly of a fish for 3 days. So not only did Aeneas follow Jesus' commands, but he also baptized Paul. We don't know if Jesus told him to or if it was Aeneas' own desire. I'm going to say it was Aeneas' doing. I think baptism is an outward expression of an inward transformation. That's why we do baptism. That's why we tend to do it. I think we should do it publicly. Right? We're making an outward confession, but my inside is changing. Baptism isn't about we are already finished, we have the answer. It's just the start of a journey. It's just a beginning of. It's just saying, you know what? I'm going to follow this guy. And that's what Saul, who is now Paul, is going to do. He's going to set aside what he thought was right, what he was convicted by, and now he's going to follow the way of Jesus. And Saul is a living recipient. As he becomes Paul, he is a living, breathing embodiment of Jesus' grace. And he'll go on to be one of the most, if not arguably, the most influential person in the spread of the gospel of Jesus. There are no writings in the Bible, nobody has any more writings than Paul does. Paul goes on to do many, many great things. So folks, the transformation of Paul, one, it shows us what's possible for us and for others through the love, grace, and mercy of Jesus. I love it when people are like, I can't go to church. If I'd walk through those doors, it'd probably catch on fire. I don't know if y'all felt like that. It'd probably just catch on fire. I can't go there. Or they really seriously think they can't be present in church because they aren't worthy to receive that same love and forgiveness. A good buddy of mine, he avoided church for a long time. He felt that way. And then he realized, Jesus died for all of us. Why would I think I am not worthy of that same love? He had a past, but he didn't have that bad of a past. I said, Matt, you ever killed anybody? He said, no. Well, Paul did, and he's fine. Paul transformed. Paul transformed. And he did one of the worst things that somebody can do. You're fine. You don't have to hold yourself to this past. Jesus' love and grace and forgiveness is for all of us, each and every one of us. All you have to do is flip to this story of Paul, to this story. Paul wasn't beyond Jesus' grace, neither are you, and neither is anyone else who walks through those doors, or anyone else who's beyond those doors. We, I believe, are to be the Aeneas in this world, welcoming, following, passing on that same grace, baptizing, and accepting others into this community. May it be so. Amen.